My stepsister announces she's pregnant at my dinner, knowing I'm infertile, and her mother slaps me. But since I have cameras in my house, she and her mother are going to have legal problems. I, a 32-year-old, recently hosted a family dinner to celebrate my promotion. I was very happy and proud of myself, because I got this after working hard at my corporate job for months. Only my partner, Keith, who is 37, knows how hard I worked to achieve it. But what was supposed to be a celebration of my success, hosted by me, turned into something else entirely. Now, everyone is criticizing me, saying I'm cruel and vindictive, and don't understand the value of family. I grew up in a blended family. My biological mother left my father for her boss when I was only 2 years old, so she's never been a part of my life. It's just been dad and me for a long time, and I don't complain. My mother never tried to reconnect, and although much of my family thought I would want to seek her out when I grew up, that never happened. I have no desire to meet my biological mother or reconnect with her. Though my stepmother and I don't get along, I've never had a real maternal figure in my life, neither in my mother nor in my stepmother, Annie, who is 53. Dad married her when I was already old enough to have started navigating life without a mother, and there was always resistance from both sides to accept each other as family. As a child, I used to watch my friends with complete families, with siblings and cousins, and I felt very envious and discouraged for not having had that luxury. However, I adapted to my own reality, and since then, dealing with life has become easier. My Aunt Rosa, Dad's sister, did everything she could to cultivate that bond with me, and I'm very grateful for everything she has done for me. But, and I mean this in the least hurtful way possible, an aunt is not a mother. I don't blame my dad for anything because I believe he did the best he could. Though when I was a child and a teenager, I didn't like a lot of the things he did, and we argued a lot over silly things. As an adult, I've come to realize the enormous sacrifices he made for me. The family dynamics were largely out of my control and his, but we made it work. Dad married Annie when I was 15, though they had already been together for a while before that. He repeatedly asked me if I was okay with him remarrying, and I know for sure that if I had said no, he wouldn't have done it. But by then, I knew that, despite Annie and I not having a great relationship, she made him happy. I also knew that we both loved him enough to be cordial and make the family work in some way. While they were dating, he introduced her to me. In the first few months of getting to know her, she crossed several boundaries. I think she assumed that, since I never had a mother, I would automatically accept her as a mother figure, and she tried hard to fill that void, so to speak. But I had been without a mother for so long that I didn't really understand what it meant to have one. Any attempt by her to discipline me or exert authority while they were dating and not yet married was met with a lot of hostility from me. In retrospect, I could have behaved better, but I was a rebellious teenager, and for me, I was doing the best I could. It became clear to her that I wasn't interested in having a mother, and that the only way this could work was if we tolerated each other's presence and got along for Dad's sake. And this arrangement worked after their wedding, at least for the first few months. I truly and genuinely believe things would have improved, and the family would have come together, so to speak, if Stephanie hadn't shown up. Stephanie, now 36, is my stepsister and Annie's daughter. Dad didn't know anything about her when he married Annie, and Annie never told him. I don't blame her for that because it was something hard for her to talk about. Stephanie was the result of a teenage pregnancy that Annie had with a man much, much older than her. She was manipulated and then forced to carry the pregnancy to term. She was practically a teenager when she became a mother, and the only reason she agreed to carry the pregnancy to term was because her abuser and his family assured her they would take full responsibility for the child and that she wouldn't have to be involved. Fortunately for her, they didn't go back on their word. So she had her daughter, and the daughter stayed with her biological father and lived there her entire life. Annie had no contact with her abuser or her daughter and moved to a different city as soon as she turned 18 when Stephanie was 1 year old. She never had contact with her and never revealed this part of her past to anyone. According to her, she told Dad, and Dad told me, that even her college and work friends don't know about her daughter because she doesn't consider herself a mother in any sense of the word. I don't know if this was her way of coping, but I guess she felt that since she had no contact with her daughter, if she stopped mentioning her, maybe she would stop existing in her mind. Unfortunately, that wasn't what life had planned for her. 6 months after her wedding to Dad, Stephanie showed up at the house. I was the one who opened the door, and just by looking at her, I knew I didn't like her. She smelled like alcohol and frankly looked like a drug addict. She was 19 at the time, so I really don't understand why she came looking for her mom as an adult. I don't know what happened after that because I was left out of all the family discussions about her. All I remember is that she stayed with us for a while, and Dad and Annie used to have long discussions late into the night for a couple of days. I think 2 weeks after her arrival, she had been living with us that entire time, Dad came to my room and said he wanted to talk to me. He told me that Stephanie would be living with us for a little while longer, until they could try to do something to straighten out her life. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even at that age, I knew that girl was a mess and shouldn't be in the house. I told Dad it was really unfair, but he said he couldn't turn her away, knowing she was part of Annie's family and needed help. Then he told me the whole story about Stephanie and Annie. He said that Stephanie's biological father had passed away, and that she no longer had any real family left, which is why she had come looking for her mother. It would have been very unfair to reject her and not help her. I hated to admit it, but I knew he was right. That's the thing about Dad. He's a good man. Even though he didn't sign up for this, and even if he had been deceived by omission, he would never do the wrong thing. I knew it was important to him, as adults, to be there for Stephanie. Although this was a huge shock for him, an even bigger shock than it was for me, to be honest, he didn't back down from doing the right thing. And so, at the age of 15, I ended up with a 19-year-old sister with whom I had absolutely no affinity. Living with Stephanie was difficult, to say the least. The adjustment was hard for everyone, and there was also the fact that the new family member was completely spoiled. She acted entitled from the day she stepped into the house. She thought Annie would adore her out of guilt, and that she would have everyone wrapped around her finger. In a way, it was true. Annie tried to handle her tantrums because she felt guilty for abandoning her daughter and involving my dad in this mess. Dad tolerated her nonsense because he felt she was a troubled child who needed proper parental figures to guide her and set her on the right path. I was the only one who didn't tolerate Stephanie's behavior at all, and because of that, the family dynamics gradually changed. The only balancing factor in the house was Dad, and even Stephanie had started listening to him and behaving around him. Annie underwent a miraculous maternal transformation and devoted herself completely to Stephanie. Both of them started singling me out for not fitting into the typical happy family. I never fit in because I simply couldn't stand Stephanie. She didn't have a job, wasn't doing anything with her life. All she did was stay home and blast loud music all day. Dad used to go to work, and it was just Annie and her in the house when I came back from school. She would go completely wild. It became extremely difficult for me to even function as a normal person in the house. I tried to tolerate it as much as I could, but I finally reached my breaking point and talked to Dad about it. He told me I should have talked to him sooner. That night, he told Stephanie that it had already been more than 6 months since she had been living with us, and that she needed to find a job soon or pursue higher education. She stood there as if someone had slapped her. I really don't know why she thought she could just rot away and that Dad would fund her entire life, but that's how she was. Annie tried to intervene and defend Stephanie, but Dad didn't allow it. He didn't mention my name in the discussion because he didn't want them to think I was poisoning him. He told Stephanie she had 1 month to look for a job and that he would help her, but it was time for her to step up. To no one's surprise, she didn't step up at all. She hadn't found a job by the end of the month, and 6 weeks later, Dad reminded her again. A few weeks later, she came home with the announcement that she was pregnant. Annie was delighted. God knows why, but Dad had had enough. He told her he wasn't willing to finance her and her child anymore, and that she'd have to figure it out on her own. Stephanie probably expected the exact opposite. She thought that because of the pregnancy, Dad would stop being so hard on her. In fact, I overheard her telling this to Annie. Annie tried to intervene and take her side, but I think Dad had also reached his limit. There was nothing more to be done, and Stephanie had no choice but to leave the house. I finally had some peace and quiet after about a year of her absurd behavior, but things always remained tense between Annie and me, and between Dad and Annie after that. Once she left, I didn't hear from Stephanie again, not that I was interested in the slightest. She was probably in contact with Annie and Dad, but I can't be sure. I never asked, and they never told me. 2 years later, I went to college in another state, and things drastically improved for me. I kept minimal contact with Annie, and only stayed connected with Dad. That wasn't a problem for him, and he never forced me to maintain a connection with Annie. But she became hostile whenever I came home for the holidays. She was sarcastic and rude, as if she didn't want me there. There was never any open conflict between us, and I tolerated her for Dad's sake. But things were much worse than before. Honestly, we couldn't stand each other anymore. It was palpable to everyone around us, and the atmosphere became thick with tension whenever I came home. So, I just stopped visiting so often. I used to call Dad or make short trips, and that's how things stayed. For me, peace of mind was more important than being in that house, so I chose that. Then, I got busy with work and my life, and I completely lost touch with Annie. What I knew about her was through Dad. 2 days ago, I hosted a party. I had received a major promotion at work, and it was a big deal, so I wanted to celebrate with everyone. I called Dad, Aunt Rosa, her husband Mike, and their son Noah. Keith and I were living together, so he was obviously there. It was supposed to be an intimate gathering of close family members. I invited Annie out of courtesy. I'm too old to keep conflicts going between us. However, in retrospect, I was a fool to expect the same maturity from her because she crossed the line so much that I don't think even Dad will want to see her again. What shocked me was that Annie arrived with Stephanie. Now, I hadn't had any contact with this woman in over 15 years, and I couldn't comprehend how anyone thought bringing her would be a good idea. I looked at my dad in disbelief and pulled him aside while Keith tried to lighten the mood. I asked why she was there, and he said that Annie had told him that I had specifically invited Stephanie. I was furious and wanted Annie and Stephanie to leave immediately. I decided not to kick them out because I didn't want to create a scene, but honestly, I should have gone ahead and done it. I tried to defuse the situation, I really did, and Annie and Stephanie behaved for the most part, so I even felt a bit comfortable with the whole situation. During dinner, everyone was asking me about my promotion, my job, and things like that, except for Stephanie. She was sitting there pouting and sulking, but I didn't pay much attention to her, just like no one else did. In fact, I thought she wasn't talking much because I had no desire to interact with her anyway. So overall, thankfully, dinner went well. But I had no idea what was waiting for me at the end of it. Just as we were about to get up, Annie stood up and said she had a special announcement to make. Before I could react, she literally squealed. She's 53 years old, and honestly, that was so embarrassing, and announced that Stephanie was expecting a baby. Everyone in the room fell into complete silence. Everyone present, except Stephanie, probably knew that I had struggled with fertility issues. Just a year ago, after multiple tests, I was told I would never be able to have biological children. The news of Stephanie's pregnancy honestly felt like a slap in the face, and I felt all the pride of the day just vanish. I tried to keep calm and congratulate her, but Dad literally gestured at Annie and asked her to sit down. She tried to start some drama about Dad's reaction, but Noah chimed in with something like, "Why are you so excited, Aunt Annie? Isn't this like her 6th child?" Honestly, I choked on my water and looked at Annie wide-eyed. She started screaming at Noah, but Aunt Rosa stood up to defend him, and it turned into a big mess in my house, where I couldn't even understand a single word they were saying. Within a few minutes, I had had enough. I told everyone that I wanted them to leave and that they couldn't come to my house and disrespect me when I was the host. Then I turned to Stephanie and told her that I hadn't invited her, and even if her mother had lied to her, she should have had the common sense to understand that it was unlikely I was the one extending an invitation or an olive branch because we had never gotten along, and we hadn't spoken in over 15 years. To my absolute astonishment, she started crying, saying I was just jealous of her fertility because I could never have children of my own. I hate to admit it, but that statement hurt more than anything else I had ever heard before. Thankfully, I kept my composure and told her that I was happy to have accomplished something for myself and worked hard to make a name for myself, so that my only achievement wasn't getting pregnant as soon as I could. I don't think anyone expected me to say something so venomous, and before anyone could say anything else, Annie slapped me in front of everyone. She slapped me so hard that my head hurt. I don't remember exactly what happened in the next 2 minutes, but all I know is that when I came back to my senses, everyone was out of the house, and Keith was sitting beside me, apologizing for letting things get so out of control. I told him it wasn't his fault, but the situation has deeply affected me. Dad has reached out to me, as have Aunt Rosa, Uncle Mike, and Noah, but I haven't responded to anyone except Noah. I'm simply not in the right mental state to talk to anyone right now. It's not just that they ruined my party and my achievements. They upset me by mocking and taunting my biggest vulnerability, and then proceeding to assault me in my own home. I know Dad isn't to blame for this. He couldn't have anticipated or controlled it, but I'm still disappointed that he didn't do anything to defend me in front of everyone when Stephanie tried to make the day all about her. In fact, it was Noah, who is still a kid, who had the courage to stand up to her. I'm too affected by what happened, and I don't think I'll speak to anyone in the family for now. I just hope and pray that this chapter closes now and I won't have to deal with Annie or Stephanie again. Update 1. They were right, and I should have known better. This isn't over at all. I never openly hated Annie and Stephanie, but I just didn't like them. However, what they've done now conveniently places them in the category of lying psychopaths who need to be kept away from humanity for their own good. I've never met a worse pair of lying scum, and God knows why Annie has turned a blind eye to her daughter's antics. She used to be sane, but now it seems like Stephanie controls her with just a gesture. It's a pity for Annie, and I feel sorry for her. She's lost all her individuality for a daughter who doesn't care about her at all. A week after the party, I still hadn't responded to anyone, so I had no idea what was going on. Annie and Stephanie came to my house. Keith opened the door and didn't even invite them in. Stephanie started screaming at the door, saying she wanted to talk to me and that I had completely ruined her life. I heard the yelling and rushed to the door, where Stephanie was crying, and Annie was saying that I had committed the most unforgivable sin and that they needed to make me pay for it. I told them they were crazy if they thought I was going to give them the time of day after they had slapped me in my own house. They said I had to pay for my sins and that they knew I had poisoned Stephanie's food, which had caused her miscarriage. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurd accusation. I told them that Stephanie had arrived unannounced and uninvited, and I had no idea that she was pregnant. How could I have magically obtained a substance, poisoned her food, and caused her miscarriage when I didn't even know she was coming, much less that she was pregnant? They just kept saying that they knew it was me, and that there was no other way something like that could have happened. I lost my temper as they continued saying I had to pay for my sins and whatnot. Keith asked what they meant by pay. They meant literal payment. They wanted me to give money to Stephanie's useless daughter, who was probably faking a miscarriage, maybe even the entire pregnancy. I was furious and exhausted at the same time. I told them I had enough money and would pay them any amount they wanted if they could prove I had caused the miscarriage. I told them to check the security camera recordings and see for themselves. That's when they realized they had been caught and started squirming. The thing is, I'm a lawyer. I know when someone is lying. That's literally my job. I knew they had been caught and that there had been no miscarriage, and probably no baby at all. So, I told them they had to come with me to the hospital immediately to confirm the miscarriage, or else I would press charges against both of them. Annie for assault and trespassing, and Stephanie for trespassing and harassment. You should have seen how they tried to flee. When we went inside, Keith told me to send the message and reports to everyone, detailing what had really happened. He said it was time to fully expose them and cut ties once and for all. So I did, and I feel very relieved. Now I know they won't have the guts to contact me again. I think I'm going to cut all contact with my dad too. I feel that he's somehow responsible for inviting all this mess into my life, and even though he's not guilty, I don't want to deal with him right now. I've faced aggression and harassment, and one of my achievements has been reduced to dust by the antics of his wife and her daughter. I can't help but feel angry at him. He was the one who allowed Stephanie into my house, and he could have asked me if I invited her or not. He could have checked, but it was easier for him to feign convenience, and that hurts me a lot. I know I won't tolerate his drama any longer, and if they try to knock on my door again, I'll file a restraining order against them. I don't care if it burns every bridge with the family, but I simply don't have the capacity to deal with this anymore. Update 2. For everyone waiting for a dramatic update, I have some news for you. Dad has filed for divorce from Annie after discovering what she and her daughter had done. He was furious and kicked Annie out of the house. I had a very long conversation with him and we both got very emotional. During the fight with Annie, she revealed that she always knew Stephanie wasn't pregnant. She already had 5 children, all with different fathers, none of whom stayed. According to Dad, all of them pay child support, and Annie couldn't hold a job for long. She thought that if they created this drama, they could get money from me to help Stephanie. She justified this by saying that since I could never have children and had just received a promotion, all the extra money could go to someone in need. Dad told her that it was my hard-earned money and I could use it however I wanted. He made it clear that I didn't owe anyone anything. They had a huge fight in which Annie continued defending Stephanie and refused to take responsibility for her actions, instead blaming everything on me. That's when Dad realized that there was no point in continuing to talk to her. She was beyond any level of sanity, and there was no way to redeem what she had done. He told her that he was filing for divorce and asked her to move out. He apologized profusely, saying that he could never forgive himself for allowing this to happen. I told him it wasn't entirely his fault, but that I needed time to overcome the whole situation and get back to normal. The past few weeks have been very exhausting for me. I had actually been hoping to relax a bit after my promotion, as it had taken a lot of effort, but all this family drama didn't allow me to do so. Aunt Rosa and Uncle Mike called me and offered their support. In fact, they encouraged me to press charges, but right now, I just want this mess to end and live in peace. They've been very understanding, which is all I could have hoped for. I have no idea what Stephanie is doing or how she's handling things, but they've already had a fight because Annie now blames Stephanie for the collapse of her marriage. Honestly, it's a spectacle if you ask me, and I've asked everyone to keep me out of it. I've cut all contact with Dad for the moment, and even my aunt and uncle know not to discuss the situation of Annie and Dad with me. That's the biggest victory I could have hoped for in this situation, and I'm happy it's over. I hope this is my last update because I don't have the capacity to tolerate another moment of this. Update 3. I didn't expect to have to write another update, but here we are. Today Annie returned to my house, this time alone, to ask for forgiveness. I don't know how she dared after everything she's done, but there she was at my door, begging me to listen to her. Maybe I opened the door and didn't let her in, as I had warned her I would do if she came back. But Annie, in her desperation, began to cry and begged me to let her speak. I stepped out onto the doorstep, clearly upset, and reminded her that I had already told her that I didn't want to see her again. I had warned her that if she didn't leave me alone, I would press charges against her for assault. I reminded her that there were witnesses to the slap she gave me at the party. Upon hearing this, Annie knelt down and begged me not to do it, not to press charges. She said she was deeply sorry and only wanted to fix things so she could reconcile with my dad. But I'm already too tired of her manipulations. This situation has exhausted all the patience I had. Even though I don't feel like going through a legal process right now, I know I can't continue to let her cross my boundaries over and over again. I told her that I couldn't trust her or her words of repentance, and that I had already made my decision. After she finally left, I spoke with Keith about what had happened. Keith told me that pressing charges might help my father in the divorce process. That made me reconsider the situation. And maybe this is the best path for everyone. Even if it's a second-degree misdemeanor, it's better than nothing. Plus, it would be another step toward closing this dark chapter and protecting myself from future intrusions. So, I've decided to move forward with the charges. It's not what I wanted, but I feel it's the right thing to do. This time, I'm going to protect myself and my peace of mind, no matter the cost. Update 4. Finally, after a long and emotionally exhausting process, things are starting to improve. I pressed charges against Annie for assault a while back. As I mentioned in my last update, even though it was a second-degree misdemeanor, I had witnesses to the slap she gave me at the party, which was enough for the case to move forward. After several hearings and testimonies, I won the case. Annie was convicted, and although the sentence wasn't severe, the ruling in my favor was a huge relief. Not so much because I needed to see her punished, but because I finally felt like I had regained some control and justice in this situation. It was also a significant blow for Annie, who had already lost a lot after being kicked out of my father's life. Speaking of my father, his divorce from Annie is now final. The separation was hard on him, but deep down he knew it was for the best. Since the divorce was finalized, things between us have improved significantly. We've had several sincere conversations, and although there's still a long way to go to fully heal, I feel we're in a much better place now. My father has been very understanding and has taken responsibility for not handling the situation better from the start. I really appreciate his effort to make amends and show me that he wants to be a part of my life in a positive and healthy way. Finally, I feel like I can start to put all this drama behind me and focus on the things that really matter. Keith and I have been planning some exciting things for the future, and even though I know the ghosts of the past won't disappear immediately, for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe and look forward without so much weight on my shoulders.